Let me warm mic.
We need to get a microphone.
You still not get it? Still? Still no?
Nació un profeta en el pueblo de Belén, con una estrella en la frente para predicarle.
6:21 coming out towards 6:22 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, as you said, you know what we're going to talk about this morning. This is why you've tuned in. If you didn't want to talk about it, you would have tuned in somewhere else. Local government elections. Results are in. The People's National Movement winning the elections. The United National Congress, however, gaining some ground. To help us analyze the results, we are joined by political analyst Rhoda Barrett, Stacey Rupnarine, former United National Congress member of Parliament and Minister, and Attorney at Law Martin George. And let's look at some of the numbers based on the preliminary results. And we need to remind everybody that these have to be verified by the Elections and Boundaries Commission, especially this talk about it being a record low voter turnout. Remember what happened the last time when the media was reporting a record low voter turnout in the local government elections, and it turned out to be very different, somewhere around 40%, and the Prime Minister was right on this, said, making me look like a complete idiot, which is nothing unusual in that sense. But Port of Spain City Corporation, 12-0 for the PNM, San Fernando City Corporation, 9-0 for the PNM, Arima Borough Corporation, 7-0 for the PNM, Chaguanas Borough Corporation, 5-3 for the UNC, Point Forte Borough Corporation, 6-0 for the PNM, Cuva Tabaqui Talparo, 14-0 for the UNC, Diego Martin, 10-0 for the PNM, Mayaro Rio Claro, 4-2 for the UNC, Penal Debe, 9-0 for the UNC, Princess Town, 8-2 for the UNC, Sangre Grande, this is the key one because that's where all the discussion is probably going to center for a little while, 4-4 PNM UNC, San Juan Laventil Regional Corporation, 11-2 for the PNM, Siparia, 5-4 for the UNC, so a narrow victory for the UNC there, and Tunapuna Piako, 14-2 for the People's National Movement. So a lot of talk last night about what the results mean, what about the governance and politics and local government. But let me get the perspectives of our three guests. Good morning, everybody, once again. Good to have you.
Good morning to you, Frizzy. Good morning to that.
Rhoda Barrett, your take on yesterday's results.
It's a win for the sitting government. It allows them to do what they need to do with local government for the next 3 years and begin by 2019 to be prepping for the campaign of 2020.
And in that sense, Stacey Rupnarine, do you see it as a clear win for the People's National Movement?
Well, I think that the first thing we have to look at is the low voter turnout. I think that neither party should be celebrating because when you look at an average of 23% voter turnout,
well, that's
really
we need to, that's preliminary.
Preliminary.
Yeah, we don't know for a fact as yet.
Agreed.
But, yeah.
And so, if we look at, let's say, the 2013 local government election, there was some 44%. If it is in fact 23% voter turnout, you're looking at half of the number of voters that we had 3 years ago. And I think political parties really need to start looking at why. I think both parties were able to motivate their respective bases to come out and vote. Outside of that, there is a general disenchantment by the population, and I see it as people almost saying that they no longer have faith in the political system. They probably don't see either option as being valuable in their respective lives, in impacting their own lives. Or perhaps people are just tired of the political rhetoric on the platform. So these are the issues that we have to look at, rather than just saying, you know, it's an outright win for the PNM. Last night the PNM have claimed victory. However, the UNC has also claimed victory because they were able to expand into 1 or 2 seats in the Sangre Grande region. So I think this has to be looked at holistically. We have to look at why we have only 23% turnout, and political parties, for their own survival, have to start finding ways to expand outside of their base. Because, I mean, yesterday I went to vote. I can't say that I saw a number of young people coming out to vote. There were traditionally older people voting. And that is not a good sign, because young people in this country need to be able to have faith in the political system and in politicians.
Everybody wins, nobody loses. That sounds like a legal matter. Because you never hear anybody admitting defeat in court, but Martin George is an attorney at law. Give me your take on what transpired last night.
Well, it seems clear to me that the politicians won and the population lost. I think that's as simply as you can put it, because both sides will continue to claim victory, because what you are getting down now to is a micro-analysis of the victory, because you are hearing persons saying, well, in this corporation, we didn't have as many seats, and then I think next they're going to be counting how many aldermen they get, and then I heard, and it was such a classic last night, the former Prime Minister said, well, we have 6.5 corporations, so you're getting out to splitting, into splitting hairs in terms of how you analyze. So from both sides, the political parties will each claim victories, but I think really and truly it's a loss for the population, because when you look at the fact that the population has not been energized, has not been enthused, has not been excited about this local government election, then you recognize that whatever messages the parties were trying to convey beyond the rum and roti, literally, politics that seems to be the order of the day, that message was clearly lost. You ask any member of the public, the man in the street, what is the local government reform about? What are the changes that are supposed to be taking place? How is it going to impact you? Most people don't have a clue. In fact, some of the candidates themselves, if you ask them, they themselves may not be able to articulate or express it properly. So therefore, it means we have to consider carefully this whole concept and notion that we have had of these corporations and the very way that we look at this question of local government. And you question even the proposed reform. Is that the proper vehicle? I am saying we need to move to a situation, Faziru, where the representatives, you have 41 constituencies, let your local governance be through your constituencies. So in other words, you have like a federated system whereby each of the 41 reps, you empower them, you give them the resources, you give them the responsibilities. So therefore you will really get performance, and now you will have your election, your general election will always be linked to performance, because it's going to move beyond the party, because you're going to be able to hold your actual member of parliament accountable and say, hey, listen, you've been given resources to deal with small things in the area, roads, drains, whatever. What have you done in your 5 years? And that, I think, is when you will start to see genuine political representation in Trinidad and Tobago.
And just to add to the mix about who's claiming victory and who is, well, everybody's claiming victory, not who is not, but the different perspectives on it. The unofficial numbers, based on the Express reporting this morning from Ria Tate on page 3, has the popular vote with the UNC ahead, 122,000 to the PNM's 117,000. So can the UNC claim victory on that basis? But again, as I said, all of these are preliminary numbers. They have to be verified by the EBC, the Elections and Boundaries Commission, and we wait for the presentation of those numbers probably within the next 48 hours. But Rhoda Barrett, in relation to what the Prime Minister said last night, to that question, because he was asked at the media conference immediately after the statements of victory and so on, he said, look, they are dealing with those who came out to vote. Those who did not come out to vote, that is their choice. There might be bigger issues tied into it. But in an election, what matters are the people who came out to vote, and those who came out to vote gave the PNM victory.
Well, the election results, within the election results, what will matter are the people that came out to vote. But the people that didn't come out to vote, obviously, they're saying something. It means something, right? So to me, the figures that we need to be looking at this morning aren't so much who got 120 something thousand.
122,000 to
right,
117.
Right, 122,000 to 117. Both parties this morning, I'm sure, are looking at the votes that they didn't get in the various seats and who came out and who didn't come out. I know that they would have very intense lists that will show you who are the regular voters in the various areas and who would have shown up and who would not have shown up. So they would have to start asking themselves whether they do it now or whether they do it in 3 years' time, why people aren't interested in voting. Martin made a point about rum and roti politics.
Or red solo and roti in this case. So go ahead. Yeah.
He made a point about rum and roti politics, and I will say this. Ours is an electorate that tends to look for what can I get, right? What can you give me? Given the economic situation now, I don't think either party was in a position to give in any significant or serious way.
What about give reform? What about give a clear indication
so
of,
now,
of
no,
electoral
let
reform?
me get to that now. The issue of reform is not something that the PNM would have started discussing in the last month. They've been talking about local government reform before the last local government election because it was on that platform that they campaigned for in 2013.
But it's easy to talk, but they haven't provided any details.
Hold on. I finishing a point here. I think that where things keep falling down is the way in which the message is sent across, it isn't being received. Because what Martin just described there about how he wants the federated system. When you look at the local government reform manifestos that were put out in 2013 for the elections, what is essentially being proposed, as far as my understanding, is a sort of federated system where you have the various regional corporations autonomous to an extent. They're answerable to the Ministry of Finance, and they go about running the various municipalities that they're responsible for. They answer to our Minister of Finance, and so now it frees up the MPs to do a certain amount of liaison, organization, and then legislative work. So to me, when I read it on paper, it makes great sense. But I am not quite understanding why it has been so difficult for the message to be translated properly to the population. I don't know if it's a situation where perhaps there should have been more panel discussions about it to break it down to the nitty-gritties to say, well, this is how it affects people, because there have been issues about policing, jobs, housing tax, and how monies are going to be deployed into the communities via councillors in a way that will empower the various municipalities more. But on the campaign trail, enough of that didn't seem to translate.
Doesn't that translate, therefore, Stacey Rupnarine, into the reality that reform really is not a priority for the main political parties, and essentially local government has been treated as the local government election essentially as a prep for your general election, because as maybe Rhoda alluded to, that they will look to see where they need to mobilize people more for a general election, that the UNC will look now to see where they need to mobilize people more for a general election. So in that context, that the entire issue of reform and transformation is a red herring, and it's all about gauging where you are at towards the next general election.
Certainly, Vizier. I think that if you look at the history of local government reform, it might date back to somewhere in the 1970s. And that's how long we've been having the discussion of local government reform. Now, if you look at the manifesto that was put out by the ruling PNM government, I think it was 112 pages long. And on paper, it looks very good. But when you start getting down to the nitty-gritty of how this thing is actually going to be effected, a lot of what they're proposing requires some form of special majority, which they do not have in the parliament. So I see this as being a smokescreen. I think it was a way to just advertise the issue of local government reform on a campaign platform. And I don't know if the population really understand what this local government reform means. They've had quite a number of ads out there about fixing potholes in the roads and so on. But local government is so much more than that. Perhaps one of the issues of failure with the local government system has been poor road and drainage infrastructure, because corporations have been starved of resources and so on. And every time you go to a councillor to try to get your box drain or your roads and so on, they tell you, okay, you have to go to central government. So that the whole principle and the whole concept of localizing services, whether it is social services or whether it is infrastructure services, localizing those services to the people really will bring some form of benefit. My question remains as to how this is going to be done, because I cannot see within the next 3 years that any sort of majority of what they've proposed in that document would be implemented for the mere fact that they do not have a special majority in the parliament. And I think that it still requires a lot of consultations. I believe up to this point, there's only been 14 consultations for that local government reform document. And therefore, there's still a lot of groundwork to be done. So I see it as simply campaign rhetoric. The UNC has also spoken in support of the theory of local government reform, but it is yet to see what is going to happen with that regard. If everybody's talking about local government reform, and it has been somewhat 30, 40 years now, we really need to start addressing that issue if we are to progress as a society. I think that you raise an important point there about the local government election setting the stage for a general election, and it is certainly the case. I think now both parties will be looking at the areas that they fell short, and they're going to be looking at ways to motivate outside of their base in their respective corporations and target specific seats and so on in preparing for our next general election.
And before we get to that, there will be another local government election based on the
Correct.
3-year cycle
Yes.
before the next general election in that sense. But Martin George, your proposal would just be added to the batting list of so many other proposals related to local government reform and so on. But as far as the decision makers, the politicians on both sides, both government and opposition, can we say that there's any genuineness by anyone, whoever would have been in office at any time, to actually make local government far more effective in delivering to citizens? Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. You could jump high, jump low, but can we say that there has been that willingness and that desire to actually translate all of this rhetoric into deliverables?
There has never been, and Fazil, with the greatest of respect, I think there will never be once we retain the current system of the corporations. When you think about it, the corporations have little or no impact when it comes to the question of a general election. In other words, the persons who would go up for a general election are your candidates from the constituencies. So that's why I'm saying we need to delink it from the corporations. As a citizen, whichever area you live in, you don't feel any necessary connection to your corporation to say, well, look, I belong to this region and this is my corporation. But at least your representative, you may know who your parliamentary representative is, even though you may not see them, but at least you know who that individual is. So that's why I'm saying we need to delink the idea of the representation from the corporations, because you can't really hold the corporations responsible when it comes to the question of representation. But every 5 years we go out and we vote for a representative. So I'm suggesting, look, let's look at it. Say, for instance, Toko Sangre Grande, right, a constituency, right, a parliamentary constituency. You must set up an administrative office or the administrative center for Toko Sangre Grande. Let that be staffed. You'd have a CEO, you'd have persons who would be working the administrative staff. But let the MP now, he would be the one who would now have to present a budget to say, well, okay, look, for this constituency, for this year, this is what we need. These are the plans we have. We want to fix these minor streets, these roads need street lights, that kind of thing. Of course, then central government will still have the role for major projects, highways, etc. But let each MP, let them work. Let us have full-time MPs. The idea of a part-time MP, I think, is ludicrous. Persons who, they come to parliament once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, they speak for a bit, but then they go off, they either have their practice as a lawyer, a doctor, whatever, and they're making their millions otherwise. But the point is, in terms of actually working for the people, they are not doing that. So I'm saying, give the resources and the responsibilities to the parliamentarians, the members of parliament. So you have 41 constituencies, let each one have that responsibility as a microcosm of the area. That way, you will have to perform, because I'll tell you, your constituents will judge you for the 5 years on whether you perform, because you have no excuse. You can't say, well, the corporation, because that's what has been happening for zero. We've been passing off the blame. When you ask your MP, why can't this be done? Well, I'm waiting on the corporation to do it. The regional corporation says they don't have funds, they don't have this, they don't have that. No, let's forget the idea of the regional corporations, bring it down to the level of where your MP, your parliamentarian, your constituency representative has to work for the 5 years. And trust me, they will have to work. And you will get a system, I'll tell you, Fazil. The bigger picture in this is you can actually end up where constituency representatives could end up being more popular than their parties, because if you have a constituency rep who for the 5 years, using the resources that are given, really develops his constituency and does work, people will support that individual. We saw it happen when, say, for instance, Jack Warner bucked the entire might of the UNC in Chaguanas because of the fact that he, I mean, of course, some of it may have been his personal influence that he leveraged, but he was able to bring himself and project himself bigger than the party. And that will break the yoke of the two-party dominance where people just vote blindly for party because you think, well, the larger party, to follow what Rhoda says, can give you something.
Can I ask a question, though?
Yes.
What's the councillor going to be doing if you're giving all, because
No, I'm saying don't have the councils.
No, so you were saying don't have the councils
That's
and get
the
rid of
idea.
councillors?
That's right.
So you
That's
want,
right.
So then you want one person to be servicing the needs of all of the persons
No,
in the
that's why you have an
constituency?
administrative complex. So each constituency, each of the 41 constituencies, you must have an administrative complex whereby you'd have a CEO, you'd have the staff. So in other words, basically the same individuals who you have in the corporations, you have a microcosm of that in each constituency. So you have a constituency administrative complex where all these issues are dealt with. Because even the idea that they're suggesting of letting the regional corporations collect the taxes, it makes absolutely no sense for Zero. Because when you think of it, your taxes really are supposed to be collected and distributed by central government. But the point is, if you now have it down to the constituency level, where each representative has to present a budget, he has to account for it, he has to show his expenditure.
But in London, they
He
use
has to-
council tax. People use the council tax system
Yeah,
in London, and
No.
they improve their real estate, they improve their councils, and that's why you can go to one part of, you can go to Croydon and pay a different sort of rent, and then go to London and pay a different sort of rent, and go to
Yes,
Chelsea, Kensington.
I'm aware it
Right,
works
but,
that way.
Right, but so why would you not see the value in constituencies collecting monies and looking after themselves? I
Because
think
in terms of
so.
Trinidad and Tobago, the way we are structured, right, when you look at our tax collecting system, first of all, the difficulties we have even from a national scale. You hear the Board of Inland Revenue itself complaining about difficulties in collecting taxes and large defaulters who are not paying their fair share. You bring that down now to the level of giving the regional corporations that responsibility, and they're not just collecting it, then you're talking about the accountability and the divestment. I don't see that that is going to make us progress as a nation any faster for Zero.
Just hold on a second.
Yeah.
I think that
In fact, before you
having-
make your comment, Ms. Rukran, I just want to ask you, just keep in mind what it is you're going to say, because I actually
So-
enjoying this discussion. I
so
don't have
am
any,
I.
don't have any, yeah, because I'm glad I don't have anything to say, because I find, a lot of this talk sometimes, we're just talking for talk's sake. But in relation to the discussion, just keep in mind the point you wanted to make. I just wanted to get your view as an MP, as a minister, and your own feeling about
Do
the
you wanna handle all of that?
the effectiveness of the present system as far as servicing the needs of your constituents. Just give me
Well,
that
Fizzy,
perspective.
that's exactly what I wanted to speak to. In my own experience, having served as both a member of parliament and a minister of government for a 5-year term, I would say a couple of things. The first point is that it is very difficult to be able to service your constituents as well as be responsible for ministerial duties. That entire system by itself, as I see it, it's two jobs. So you're asking one person to do the role of really two functions. And now that goes to a different issue, which is the issue of constitutional reform.
Yes.
And that is another issue that has been on the table for many years now. So that is the first problem, the dual factor of being an MP and being a minister of government. The second issue is about this part-time member of parliament. The job of an MP is certainly not a part-time job. I mean, I've had instances where on a Sunday afternoon, you have to go and visit constituents who are in flood zones and flood areas and so on. People call you midnight MP, we have no water. So it really is not a part-time job. This is a full-time job, and it is not about attending the parliament one day for the week. That is one part of your duty. Representing your constituents in the parliament is one aspect of the job. The other aspect is to actually help your constituents. There are persons who might need access to social services and so on. You have to be able to lobby the government and those in authority for assistance for those people. And then there's a third aspect, which is that you've got to be present in your community. You have to attend, whether it's the service in the temples, the churches, your masjids.
Every funeral
You've
in
got to
sight.
go to, exactly,
Yes.
because that is your role. You are representing people, and therefore you've got to maintain that connection with the public. And in describing what a functioning MP